text?
No.
It's not. So what's different about it?
Because we have many different traditions. We have the Masoretic text,
Correct.
which is the one we tend to use there. We also have the Samaritan Pentateuch, another translation that's used in the Samaritan language. There are other also versions of the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, which don't exactly match what we've got today. It's quite odd, really. It seems sometimes maybe the Septuagint is quoting from a Hebrew version we no longer have when it translates.
There's a few places.
So there's a number of discrepancies and contradictions. We don't have the original. What is the earliest complete copy of the Hebrew Bible we have in the world, anywhere in the world? What's the dating of it?
I think it was 300 AD, 400 AD.
No, it's about, I think it's the 10th or the 11th century AD. And it's like the Codex Leningrad, or Leningrad Codex. That's 1,000 years after Jesus. That's the earliest manuscript we have, complete manuscript.
Maybe complete, but that's not the earliest manuscript.
Right.
I never said it was the earliest, I said the earliest complete manuscript.
They use those manuscripts
Okay.
to basically
So what's the earliest
demonstrate
fragment
that
we've got?
these are
What's
the
the earliest
scriptures,
fragment we've got?
And they are in
I don't know
agreement.
the date.
Well, Dead Sea Scrolls. So Dead Sea Scrolls contain the Jewish scriptures in part, yeah? And what's the earliest fragment we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example?
Well, I know the full copy of the book of Isaiah is in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right.
We have the same copy today. It also has Isaiah 50.
It's often not the same, but we'll let that pass.
It is all the
You read
same,
Hebrew,
yeah.
do you? You read Hebrew, do you?
It's
I
the
do
same.
not.
Right, there you go.
Hebrew
He's
manuscripts
done
are
copies.
the same.
Okay.
We know the motions of the words.
Do you read Hebrew?
So the oldest,
read Hebrew
I don't read it
right.
either.
Okay, so then why are you
He's arguing
You're
that
making
he
these
has
claims,
no-
not me.
Yeah, and that's what the Hebrew scholars have
So,
said.
what is the earliest copy we have of the Pentateuch, of the first 5 books of Moses?
I don't know.
It's about 200 years BC.
Now, all of these predate
But it's
the Quran,
interesting,
and they all
when-
match.
600 years
They all
before
match.
the
That
Quran.
doesn't undermine.
When did Moses
the
live? When did
reliability,
Moses live, do you think?
The validity of the scriptures. These
Okay.
all
But when did
match.
Moses
There's
live?
all the
It
major
doesn't-
points
See, if
of
Moses lived
doctrine
about
and history.
2000 BC, yeah? So we have a gap
these predate
of
the
about,
Quran,
we have a
and at
gap
the
of
time
about
of the Quran, it says,
two,
"We accept
excuse
what
me,
was revealed in the Torah."
should we
I
go
thought
over
this
here?
was Speakerscorner.
You're interrupting. So as I was saying,
You're
we have a gap.
dominating the
We have a gap of
So I
about
think if
2,000
you
years.
If it's fair,
We have a
others should
2,000
be able to
years.
respond.
No, it's not fair.
How is it not fair?
It's a Speaker's Corner.
But all these predate anything from the last 2,000 years.
But the point is, if we have a gap of nearly 2,000 years between the originals, which you think is the Jewish Bible, the Genesis through to
No,
Exodus.
there's no gap.
But the oldest copies we've got are the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're about 200, 300 BC. Moses lived 2000 BC,
Yeah, at least.
so we have a gap of nearly 2,000 years. So how do we know that the Jewish manuscripts have been reliably
So we have them
transmitted?
saved in the.
Sorry?
Is it okay if we record?
Yeah, I just had to look because he was interrupting. Yeah.
So we have the Dead Sea Scrolls that prove the canon of the Old Testament.
No, they didn't. How does it prove it?
Yeah, they're.
Okay. Do we have the originals?
I
Do
don't
we have the
originals.
originals?
But I can go
Okay.
find it for
Torah,
you.
the
But if the originals
Zabur,
go back
and
to
the
Moses,
Injil.
if the originals go back to Moses, is that right? Moses wrote the
Yeah, I
Pentateuch,
believe
right?
that, yes.
So when Moses lived about 2000 BC, for the sake of
I don't
argument,
know the exact dates.
do you think it's roughly fair?
Do what?
Roughly fair, about 2000 BC, 2500 BC.
Somewhere possibly.
So
around
if
there.
the oldest copies we've got are the Dead Sea Scrolls, and Moses lived many, many centuries before, how do we know that the original is being faithfully preserved and handed to us today?
We definitely do because of the scribes. In fact, the scribes they held that they wrote.
Well, what scribes?
They wrote and kept the Torah, the Tanakh. They kept it in order all those years.
But
In the New Testament.
But this is much, much later. We know that during the medieval period, they preserved it. In the early centuries, thousands of years ago, you didn't have a scholarly class or a scribe class that did this.
So the Tanakh, New Testament's based on the Tanakh, the Old Testament. It was quoted.
Okay,
In the
but let's look
Septuagint.
at the New Testament. What's the oldest complete copy of the New Testament we have?
Let's see, that's irregardless. We know we have
Well, no,
records.
but we
even
have
church
it.
fathers
It's
quote the whole Bible. Yeah.
we have the Codex
Easily by the
Codex
earliest-
Sinaiticus.
There are scripts, parchments, small pieces that date
Yeah.
back to the
Okay.
early first century.
How many
Do you
manuscripts-
believe- Do you agree with that?
How many? Let me ask you. How many
Well,
manuscripts
I'd like
do we
to
have from the first
I'd like to have
century?
a confirmation. Do you believe that?
No, I don't.
You don't believe that you can go
Now,
find?
it's not a question what I believe, it's a question what's the evidence.
Is there, so there's not actual parchments of the New Testament predating
from the
120
first
AD.
Exactly. So from the first century, how many manuscripts or fragments do we have of the New Testament? Roughly, how many?
About 6,000.
No, we have none. None at all. Nothing. Not a single fragment. Nothing at all.
The New Testament
Because
predate the Quran.
let's go over here.
The Quran says we accept what was revealed in the Gospel.
Okay.
So you
I'm
know
just
this
trying
is-
to
hey,
because he's
you know this
trying to hijack the
Paul
conversation.
Williams. He's an experienced
So-
Muslim debater, and he's trying to control the conversation.
I am
and of course he's
because
trying
you're
to
trying
lead
to derail it and hijack it.
No, if I respond
So,
with a valid point,
so my
then
point
you're
is-
obligated to respond
No,
to
I'm
it.
not. This is Speaker's Corner. It's Speaker's Corner.
Then you're afraid of the argument.
I'm terribly
And that's a
afraid.
coward.
Terribly
You know,
afraid.
every
you
one
should
of
be,
You're abusing me now.
because
Which Steve for you?
Christianity is the truth. That's right.
You're not welcome in this
Every
conversation.
one of these
Excuse me, I can go.
predates
This is
the
Speaker's
Muslim
Corner.
beliefs.
Fine.
Speaker's
But
Corner.
But the point is
We
this:
speak,
if we have no
preach,
manuscripts
and
in the
there's
first
no
century, how many do we have from the second century AD of the New Testament?
We're happy to have a
Yeah.
dialogue, but your speaker doesn't want to have a
Look,
dialogue.
give me an example.
Well, I
From
don't
the
have
first
a list
century.
of them.
There are
I don't
none
have
from
a
the
list.
first
I know I've
century.
seen them though.
What is a
Where have you
Christian
seen
matter?
them?
I've seen them on pictures.
Can we have a dialogue?
There are no
And
fragments
I'm
from the
saying I
first
want to have a
century.
dialogue, but I'm
beginning
commanded
of the
to
second
preach.
century.
I'm
Right,
commanded
not
to
or north
preach
from the beginning of the second.
120 AD.
Okay, we have the Johannine fragment, a credit card sized fragment about the middle of the second
You know what
century.
P95 is?
Yeah.
Regardless
And not
of
95.
What is it?
We have a
What is
fragment.
P95?
Let me explain.
Okay.
We have a fragment of John's Gospel in the John Rylands Library in Birmingham, which is dated to about the middle of the second century. This is just a credit card sized fragment, yeah? But that's not the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke, it's not the Paul's letters, it's not anything else, just a fragment. So when do we have the complete New Testament? That's in the 4th century. It's called the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus. This is the earliest complete manuscripts we have. That's
that
4th
predates the
century.
Quran.
Okay,
That
that's
predates the Quran.
that's 4 centuries
That predates the
after
Quran.
Jesus. Yeah?
That predate the
So
Quran.
do you not believe that Moses is real? That's the way I'm understanding
No,
it.
that's a completely different point.
So,
He's real.
so
He's real.
It comes to the point.
No, it
so-
doesn't. No, I believe
Yeah,
he's real. But the point is, the manuscripts are many, many centuries after Moses.
The Quran came
So
way
we
later than Moses,
we can't
and yet
know
it
that they
talks
are
about Moses.
have been reliably
The Quran
transmitted.
came way later than Jesus and talks about
let me
Jesus.
ask you this.
Yeah,
are there
yeah.
any fragments that prove Muhammad's existence?
The Quran came
Okay,
way
you want
later.
to
Is there any literature that proves his
Okay, but
existence?
before we change the subject completely and talk about another religion, let's finish
Well,
off with what I was
to me,
saying.
you're really not satisfactorily answering that question.
But that's fine, because perhaps it's all new to you. You're not familiar with the subject. So maybe you need time to process it. So when I
I'm familiar with the argument.
Well, no, but you're not,
I
because
just don't have the list of,
because you said that there are 6,000 fragments from the 1st century, which is wrong.
from the New Testament.
No, you see, you're not aware. You're not aware of textual criticism.
I know there's at least 5,000 to 6,000 fragments.
No, they are from the medieval period, centuries later.
That predate Muslim religion, 600
Nothing to
years.
do with the Muslim religion. I'm talking about the New Testament itself. Nothing to do with Islam. I'm talking about the New Testament. So we don't have any fragments
So
from the
you don't
1st
know what
century.
P95 is. So you don't know any,
Tell me what P95 is.
So you don't know any of these fragments in the early 2nd century.
I do. I just mentioned the John Rylands fragment in the university in Manchester. Have you seen it?
I have not.
I've seen
I
it.
would like to go see
Can you read it?
I cannot read it.
I can read it.
I got a way that I can take a picture of it and translate it.
Yeah, that's good. I don't need a translation.
So you can read Hebrew. And
I think we've been through this before. We're going around in circles. Anyway, I'm going to go now. Your gentleman is obviously quite excitable. Is he from America as well?
I think so.
Okay.
You have a good day.
I hope you have a good time in England. And remember that King James had very little to do with the translation of your Bible. It was John Tyndale.
That's the reason why.
Yeah, but who translated
That's
it?
the reason why several men. About 6
John
men.
Tyndale translated over 90%.
So you're in error there. You're wrong. Because
The New Testament predates
John
the
Tyndale
Quran.
did not write.
Most of
King
it
James. No, he didn't. A lot of it is the same. I agree.
It's taken from him. If you
Yeah.
okay, let me give you a try. If you go to the Wikipedia article on the King James version, it explains all of this, where that came from. It came from John Tyndale. Over 90% comes
William
from
Tyndale, you mean?
That's what he's saying.
That's right.
Tyndale. It comes from
That's a big
Tyndale.
mistake.
Tyndale's
I know,
Bible.
that's what I tried to tell him. You just don't understand.
Tyndale.
See, you're not really coming off as very truthful because you're saying something that we know is a bona fide false thing.
So you think Tyndale had nothing to do with that Bible?
William Tyndale did, not John.
Maybe you're right.
No, that's not maybe, that it is.
But the
And
Tyndale
you're
I'm referring to
demonstrably wrong.
is the
So
author
what else
of that
are you
book.
wrong about today, Paul?
Okay. So Tyndale is the author of 90%
What?
of
That's
that
absurdity. That's ridiculous.
Hey,
Hey, we're going to go now because we're dealing with people who don't want to learn, unfortunately.
Already?
No, I would just finish off by saying, dealing with some American missionaries are nice, some are not. These people don't want to learn because they think they know it all. It is a fact. Consult any scholars of the New Testament and the King James Version and translations. The King James Version we have today is largely copied from Tyndale's translation, who lived long before the King James. So they didn't know that, and they denied that because they're ignorant. They don't know. And what can I do? It's a Speaker's Corner. But I invite you just to Google it, look on the Wikipedia article. You'll see that Tyndale, John or William, I got his first name wrong, but Tyndale is the man who's responsible for over 90% of the King James Version, which itself is based on very inferior manuscripts. We have much earlier manuscripts there. And the manuscripts we now have contradict in many important ways, like Psalm 22, what the King James Version has. So this is an example of how Christians don't really want to learn because it challenges their faith. And that's a shame, really, because the truth will set you free, as someone once said. And thank you very much, folks.